A Cowboy Worth Waiting For. By Melinda Curtis. Chapter 1. Wade Keller, you need me. Ronnie Pickett's pert little nose was thrust high in the air, and her silky black hair swung from beneath her black cowboy hat. Wade Keller's chest heaved, and it wasn't because he just jogged out of the arena after a semi-successful bareback bronc ride at a rodeo north of Tulsa. Ronnie's words yanked the rug from beneath his widower feet. I'm starting a matchmaking service. Now, you need a wife and Ginny needs a mama, Ronnie explained matter-of-factly, smiling kindly at Wade's 10-year-old daughter. I'm going to find you the perfect woman. Gaping, Ginny stared up at Ronnie with an expression that was half worshipful and half shocked. Ronnie had that effect on people. She was a force to be reckoned with when she set her mind to something. Wade just hadn't expected her mind to be set on finding him a wife. Ronnie's right. Wade's father beamed at her as if her conclusion had flipped a light on in his nearly bald head, currently covered by a wide white Stetson. Frank Harrison was actually Wade's foster father, although sometime during the past 20 years, Wade had stopped attaching the foster label to him or any of his other foster family members. You should hear Ronnie out. And marry again? Wade shook his head. Normally, he gave credence to his father's opinion, but not today. He stared Ronnie straight in her big dark eyes and said, not interested. Wade's score from his ride on Graveyard Express was announced. As he'd suspected, it wasn't going to be high enough to put him in the money. His rhythm had been off. He'd been lucky to stay on for 8 seconds but not lucky enough to place. Another waste of a Saturday entry fee. He couldn't afford to lose anymore. Disappointed and annoyed, Wade took Ginny's hand and tried to move past Ronnie. She stepped in front of Wade, cutting him off. Not so fast. Ronnie tossed her hair over her shoulder as if she were a bronc tossing off an inexperienced rider. You've been avoiding me, and that's bad because you need me. Wade hesitated, struck by those 3 words once more, you. Need. Me. Do I need Ronnie Pickett? Currently, Wade was on a dismal losing streak. Some would argue that he needed something. But was matchmaking Ronnie, and a second wife, the answer to his prayers? He took stock of the petite woman in front of him. Never one to shy away from color, Ronnie was dressed like a Valentine's Day card, shimmery red boots, a bright pink flowered button-down and blue jeans with white flowering vines climbing up her seams. She was the polar opposite of his wife in practically every way, louder, more colorful, more assertive. And wherever she went, a well-meaning accident was sure to follow. Do I need Ronnie Pickett? If forced to decide right now, he'd have to say no. And so, he said just that, no. But whatever you're selling, Miss Ronnie, he gave her a stern look, I'm not interested. Ronnie put her hands on her slim hips. She'd been bold in high school and emboldened by every rodeo win in her short barrel racing career. He could remember a time when a dare combined with her magnetic, brash character and dark, silky locks had enticed him to ask her to Clementine High School's junior prom. She'd thanked him for asking and told him they were too much alike to be a couple. And then she'd pointed out that her shy, quiet friend Libby worshipped the ground he walked on and was just what he needed. And oddly enough, she'd been right. He and Libby had become a couple. After high school, they'd gotten married. They'd been well suited. He'd been happy until Libby passed away. A lump tried to fill Wade's throat. Didn't mean Ronnie was right about him needing a wife and mother for his little girl. After losing his parents when he was in middle school and losing Libby 2 years ago, Wade didn't think he could take any more heartache. Love was risky. While he'd been sorting through his thoughts, Ronnie's mouth had been moving. It was only her last words that sank in. Wade Keller, do you want to be lonely in your old age? 32 wasn't old. And living on the Dunn Roman Ranch was never lonely. Many of his brothers still lived and worked on the DRR. Wade pushed his hat back, stared Ronnie down and got right to the point. I don't mind being alone. Wade's father chuckled the way he did sometimes when he thought one of his sons said something illogical. Given the number of cocky, full-of-themselves teenage boys Frank and Mary Harrison had taken in as fosters at the DRR over the years, Frank's life had been filled with laughter. Wade set his jaw. I'm too busy to go looking for a woman. He had his plate full helping his parents and brothers run their rodeo stock company, competing in bareback bronc riding and raising a little girl. I know you're busy. That's why I can do the searching for you. Ronnie bent her knees until her face was level with Ginny's. She fussed with the set of his daughter's cowboy hat. You want your daddy to be happy again, don't you, Ginny? Talk about low blows. Wade frowned. Ginny nodded slowly. Daddy doesn't tell me jokes no more. Any more, Wade corrected automatically. You lost your heart for dad jokes? Ronnie rose to her full height, which meant the top of her black hat barely reached Wade's shoulder. Her nearly black eyes sparkled the way they did when she thought she was winning. This is serious, Wade. You can't go pining away like this. The way she teased him. It reminded Wade of the experiences they'd shared as kids, including times most wouldn't call good but ones he cherished, nonetheless. He didn't want to revisit those memories. Mary and I have been telling you to date since last summer. Wade's father upped the ante with his 2 extra cents. Ginny needs more than just a daddy to look after her. She lives on a ranch with her grandparents and a passel of uncles. If anything, Ginny had too many cooks in the parental kitchen. But she doesn't have a mama, his father insisted, as if 2 parents were necessary, like 2 wheels on a bicycle. A mama would buy me dresses I like, Ginny said, wide-eyed and sad-faced, clearly trying to help play Wade into Ronnie's meddlesome hands. And teach me other girl stuff. That's enough from you too, Wade grumbled, feeling outnumbered. We can all see what's happening here. Ronnie rubbed Wade's arm consolingly. Her touch was soft and friendly. There was no reason Wade should feel the impulse to cover her hand with his or draw her closer. This was Ronnie Bossy Pickett. People always protest too much when they deny the truth, Ronnie said with a superior smile. He'd always been partial to that smile and... Yowza! What had come over him? Ronnie had said herself 15 years ago that they were too much alike and not romantically compatible. Wade turned his gaze away from Ronnie's glossy red lips. There is no truth and no denying. I'm a bachelor now, and I'll be a bachelor until the day I die. Now, if you'll excuse me, Miss Ronnie, I've got to stow my competition gear and then help my family manage stock for the rest of this rodeo. He walked away from the would-be matchmaker. But he could feel her gaze upon him, as unsettling as her touch. Most people attending a rodeo were spectators, a level removed from the action. Veronica Pickett wasn't competing anymore, but she was no spectator sitting in the stands eating popcorn. That was something she couldn't bear. The dust, the noise and excitement of rodeo life had been a part of her DNA since she was a little girl watching her daddy compete in the bronc riding event. She'd followed in his footsteps. Sort of. She was a former barrel racing title holder, former rodeo queen and current spokesperson for Cowgirl Pro Fashion. She lived for the action in and out of the arena. When Ronnie showed up at the rodeo nowadays, she spent a little time doing meet and greets for Cowgirl Pearl, checked in with her friends who were competing, and then had all the time in the world to be a spectator. If only she was the spectating type. She couldn't sit still. She was a fixer. And what she liked to fix most was other people's love lives. She had a track record to validate her matchmaking skills. But it was only recently that she decided to use that talent to make sure Wade didn't wallow in the grief of Libby's dying from a brain tumor. Before Libby passed, she'd asked Ronnie to watch over Wade. If only the stubborn man would make that easy. He'd become something of a recluse. For nearly a year, she'd been trying to fix him up, but he'd rejected every invitation she'd extended for coffee or dinner. It was time to go to extremes. After much thought, she'd come up with a plan. Everyone knew she had a love of, and a knack for, matchmaking. Everyone also knew she had a history of starting businesses that eventually failed, a bothersome reputation, but the truth, nonetheless. What if she leveraged the two? No one would be too surprised to learn she was starting a matchmaking business. And no one would be too surprised if that business failed, after she found Wade a wife. But darn that Wade Keller. He'd turned her down. Was my pitch all wrong? Perhaps it needed refinement. She sometimes conducted herself like a bulldozer when a broom would do, especially when she was nervous. What she needed was another run-through of her pitch. Ronnie planted her fancy red boots in the back corridor of the auditorium where the rodeo was being held and raised a hand to stop a handsome bull-riding cowboy. "Cord, didn't you get dumped last month by Mitzi or Mandy or Molly someone?" She couldn't remember the woman's name. "Millie." Grinning, the lean blonde cowboy grabbed hold of Ronnie's elbows. "Are you finally asking me out?" "Because the answer is yes." Ronnie gently pinched Cord's cheek, trying to say without saying that she was too old for him. He was barely out of high school, and her 30th birthday was fast approaching. "I'm starting up a rodeo matchmaking service. Are you single or not? I've got a list of cowgirls looking for love." Or at least, she hoped to have one by night's end. Currently, she only had 2 women on board. "Love?" Cord scoffed, rubbing his cheek without losing that mischievous grin. "Who needs love when I can offer charisma?" "You mean a good time?" Ronnie softened her words with a gentle smile. Reputations travel fast on the circuit, Cord. Good-time cowboys are usually popular with the ladies only if they're winning. And Cord hadn't been lately. "You're full of low blows today, Ronnie." Wade passed by. He'd shed his competition accoutrements, his bright orange leather-fringed riding chaps, his wrist wraps, elbow support and such. He looked like any regular working cowboy as he headed toward the holding pens, presumably to help his family continue the smooth flow of stock the rodeo relied on for bull and bronc riding, steer roping and steer wrestling competitions. Wade had an athletic build with dark brown hair and deep brown eyes that were easy to get lost in since they didn't do a good job of hiding the pain of his past. 2 years ago, he'd been the points leader in the bronc riding field in the prairie circuit. Now, as a widower, he was trying to work his way back to the winner's circle. But he was as out of sync with life as he was with the broncs he'd drawn to ride. Distant. Unapproachable. Or just uncatchable, if the pace his long legs set was any indication. That man's a challenge. And she wasn't sure she was up to it. The pressure of Ronnie's promise to Libby wrapped around her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Low blow," Cord said, repeating Wade's sentiment with a chuckle. "Look at me. I have no need to swipe those dating apps. And I won't hire a matchmaker unless someone like Wade Keller is on your roster and blissfully happy because of it. My sales pitch really stinks." Ronnie held on to her smile, trying to look as if she had a secret where Wade was concerned. "I'll get back to you on that Wade Keller thing. But you'd best sign up soon, or you'll be dateless on Valentine's Day." Which was less than a month off. Cord laughed again. "Honey, I'm never dateless." He spun away, heading toward the chutes. Behind Ronnie, Wade's brothers from the D-double herded bulls through a funnel toward the arena and cowboys waiting for a ride. The crowd noise increased, shouts mingling with applause until Ronnie couldn't distinguish individual voices of those walking past. She stepped out of the flow of foot traffic to give herself a pep talk. Optimism and determination had always been her superpowers. Admittedly, things didn't always go her way or as planned. But Ronnie was good at bouncing back and landing on her feet. "I will find Wade a wife." She hugged that thought, drawing several deep breaths as she focused on another mantra: count your blessings. She had 2 women interested in dating Wade. All she needed was Wade. "I can convince him." She'd find a moment alone with the former bronc riding superstar to persuade him to date again. She knew that would be a tough order. Since Libby died, Wade wasn't just avoiding her but everyone. He didn't hang around for idle chit-chat, not at the rodeo or in their hometown of Clementine, Oklahoma. "You look like you just lost the rodeo queen crown." Bess Glover separated herself from the stream of cowboys and cowgirls passing by. Ronnie's BFF flicked the brim up of Ronnie's black felt cowboy hat with one finger. "That is, you look the way you did that time you lost the rodeo queen crown to me." She laughed warmly, softening the tease. "I would have earned the crown first if I hadn't started dating Quinn Lachey during rodeo week." Quinn was a very short-lived footnote in her dating history. Ronnie absently straightened her hat, drawing Bess to her left but keeping her gaze on her friend's face. "Quinn can charm anyone. It was a minor error of judgment on my part. I should have known better, but his sweet talking was awfully sweet. I couldn't resist." After she'd lost, Quinn had broken up with her, claiming Ronnie was too high maintenance. More like my standards were too high. Bess rolled her eyes. I learned my lesson. And she'd won the next year. Ronnie gave Bess an assessing look, from her tame red locks to her spotless brown cowboy boots. You haven't agreed to sign up for my matchmaking service. That's because I'm your friend. And friends don't enter into financial agreements with friends. Bess and Ronnie had known each other since grade school, same as Ronnie and Wade. Nowadays, Bess was a teacher and Clementine High School's rodeo coach. She had boxes and boundaries for everything, including, it seemed, friendship. I know the type of man who'd be perfect for you, Ronnie told her. Someone who'd help Bess cut loose sometimes without worrying about being judged or being seen as imperfect. Wade Keller. I have too much on my plate right now to date, Bess said. She turned and stepped into the path of one of her former rodeo team members, now a barrel racing contender. That's the excuse everyone gives, Ronnie muttered, crossing Bess off her list of potential candidates for Wade. Bess and her former trainee talked a few feet away, but their words were lost to Ronnie in the buzz of the crowd noise. Ronnie waited for Bess to finish. She wasn't good at waiting. She was go go go, which made Wade's roadblocks that much more frustrating. But I won't give up, Libby, Ronnie said softly. Her older brother Hank appeared at her side, waiting to speak until she looked at him. Are you okay? You're talking to yourself. I'm fine. I haven't broken anything today or made a mess of this. Ronnie mustered an enduring smile as she extricated her arm. Admittedly, she wasn't the most nimble on her feet. She did sometimes rush into things without thinking, and her enthusiasm occasionally resulted in what some might call disaster. Her childhood had been a string of mishaps and misunderstandings. But Ronnie had found her stride as a barrel racing competitor and in the rodeo realm. For the most part, she was adulting with flying colors. If only her family didn't still treat her as if she'd only thrive within their overly protective embrace. Did you make that heifer stock trade? Yap. Hank had a faraway look, as he often did since he'd taken over running the Pickett ranch while their father served in the state house. And then he seemed to come back to the present, smiling again at Ronnie. Are you ready to go? Not yet. I've still got business to conduct. There were lots of events yet to be run, and she wanted the chance to recruit more potential matches for Wade. Fair enough. Hank leaned closer to Ronnie to say, be ready to go in 2 hours. We want to beat the traffic. He stalked off, disappearing into the throng of cowboys streaming toward the stock pens. Did Hank sign up to be matched? Bess asked, taking Hank's place next to Ronnie. He should. You've been successfully playing matchmaker since we were kids. Look at Wade and Libby, Pascal and Nina, Jacqueline and Monty. She ticked Ronnie's triumphs off on her fingers. Dan and Tilly, Ebony and Lucas, Trixie and Gerald. Do I need to go on? Ronnie shook her head. Bess grinned. That's because you know and everyone else knows about your expertise. You think I can do it? Ronnie asked, a bit breathless by her friend's support. Charge for matchmaking? The thought gave her pause. Her plan had been to find someone for Wade using the launch of a matchmaking business as a cover. But do this for real? Yap. Bess scanned the passers-by. But you need to build your client list the way I build my rodeo team roster. First, recruit one standout, someone everyone respects and secretly aspires to be. Wade Keller. A man as stubborn as the day was long. And 2 solid athletes that are hard workers without big egos, Bess added. John Garner and Tuff Patterson. 2 other popular, as yet unmarried, competitors on the circuit. She ruled out Cord. He was already in love with himself. Ronnie saw that now. She had to sign people ready to settle down. If I do this, I need to refine my sales pitch. Ronnie wasn't sure she wanted a matchmaking business for real. There was always the chance that she'd muck up the business side, and then she'd be unable to make matches casually. Not that there were many of her friends left single who were interested in finding love. Not that she could find fault with her friends who wanted to remain single. She was of the same frame of mind. Find your standout. And then their friends will all want to tag along, Bess said decisively. Now's the perfect time to build the foundation of your team, Ronnie. Right. Here I go. Ronnie marched off, if not to start a matchmaking business for real, at least to find a woman Wade could spend the rest of his life with. Chapter 2. You know the drill, Tornado Bill. Wade whistled shrilly, riding at the flank of a bull that had just thrown young Cord to the dust. He guided Tornado Bill toward the gate with the chute leading back to the paddock and the cattle truck that would return him to the DRR, the Dunn Roman Ranch. Wade Keller, you need me. Ronnie's words kept playing on repeat in his head. You need me. Those 3 words shouldn't have made Wade smile. But here he was, having lost his event and grinding through the dust and noise of rodeo stock management with a long drive home ahead of him later. You need me. He grinned. That's the last of the bulls. His older brother Chandler closed the gate after Tornado Bill passed through. He was the DRR's ranch foreman and had been in charge since Frank had stepped back from the off-ranch operations a few years ago. What are you grinning for? Cord eating dust? Chandler glanced back toward the young cowboy who was limping out another gate, the last bull rider before the chuck wagon races. Wade wiped the smile from his face and reached for a quick excuse. I like that Tornado Bill is building a mean record. The harder bulls were to ride, the more popular they were on the circuit because a cowboy could earn big points if they stayed on until the buzzer. Are you sure that's why you were smiling? Griff, another of his brothers, rode up to Wade. He was burly with a slapdash attitude and often served as the pickup man, getting bull and bronc riders to safety. I saw you with Ronnie Pickett earlier. I hear she's turned her hand toward the art of love. If you're smiling, that's good. It's about time you put yourself back out there. That is not why I was smiling. I bet it is. Tate, one of Wade's younger brothers, leaned on his saddle horn not far away. Ginny told me Ronnie's going to find her a new mama. His family laughed. Even Dad and Ginny, sitting in the nearby stands, seemed to be amused. Not that they could hear. Heads bent together, watching something on Dad's phone, the pair was smiling. It was good to see Dad smile considering he seemed a bit adrift lately. Wade pointed at Tate and Griff. Don't you two need to load bulls in the transport? Oh, there's something going on here all right. Chandler chuckled. Giving orders is my job, Wade, not yours. And then he gestured at Tate and Griff. You guys need to load bulls. Get on with you. Chandler returned his attention to Wade. You and Ryan need to load the near chute for steer wrestling. That's the next event after the chuck wagon races. And Wade. About to do Chandler's bidding, Wade held his horse in check. Yeah? You and I and the rest know too well that sometimes you need to start over. Chandler was the oldest of the men Frank and Mary Harrison had taken in as teenagers. He was also the most likely of the brothers to dole out advice, wanted or not. It's okay to smile at the possibility of dating. A little luck on your rides and a little love at home, and you'll be back on your feet. Wade frowned. One doesn't necessarily feed the other. Love and luck didn't blend into a recipe for a happy life. And luck is hard to come by. Chandler shrugged. Sometimes the luck you need turns up when you least expect it. Wouldn't that be nice? But not only did Wade no longer believe in love, he didn't believe in luck either. In fact, I do know Tate Oakley. Ronnie had been smiling so long and so hard for so many ready-for-love cowgirls that her cheeks felt like they might crack and tumble into the path of the chuck wagons being pulled by teams of 6 horses around the arena. And yes, Tate is single. But what about Wade Keller? Oh, Tate is the more handsome of the two. Sarah gushed. She was a barrel racer with a steady track record and had the shine of a woman enamored with the idea of love. The crowd cheered on their favorite rigs as they passed by, which prevented conversation and gave Ronnie time to think about Sarah's idea of the ideal mate. It wasn't Wade. And Tate was a bad choice. He was dangerously handsome and a total heartbreaker, like Cord. And speak of the devil, there was Tate, sitting on a top rail over by the catch pen gate next to Wade and a half dozen other DRR cowboys. They were a handsome crew. The image of all those good-looking cowboys in a row reminded Ronnie of being on the high school rodeo team. She'd been a freshman and Wade had been a junior, but somehow they'd gravitated toward each other. Even as a teen, he'd been a man of few words. And since a failed summer episode involving a cheerleading tryout where she'd failed to uphold the bottom of the human pyramid, Ronnie had been happy to be with kids who always looked for the silver lining and didn't belabor the point that she'd ended up at the bottom of the pyramid pile. "What is it you're looking for in a man?" Ronnie prompted Sarah when the chuck wagon race came to a close and the applause died down. "Well, if I say cute, I'll sound shallow." The glow faded in Sarah's eyes. "I want someone nice and a guy with a good sense of humor. A man with goals in life and a willingness to try hard too. Someone who hasn't worked himself into a hole." A hole? Ronnie had been filling in blanks but wasn't sure she'd heard Sarah correctly on this last bit. A hole. Sarah turned to face Ronnie, an earnest expression in her eyes. Guys who gamble on themselves at the rodeo, even though they never win, dig a financial hole. I met someone last year who put every entry fee on a credit card and hadn't won in over a year. He threw tens of thousands of dollars toward an impossible dream. He didn't know when to quit. Ronnie glanced toward Wade once more. He'd had a good 5 years or so at the top of his game. He might have saved money to pay for all his entry fees nowadays. But how much longer could that last? She made a mental note to ask him. All for the sake of finding him true love, of course. Knowing when to throw in the towel shows maturity. Sarah stared toward Wade and his brothers. "But I'm not sure I want a man who's been married before and has kids." Ronnie sighed. "You shouldn't count someone out without good reason, Sarah. Tell me a little more about yourself. And why Wade wouldn't be perfect for you," she thought. "You said you live on your family's ranch. Is it self-sustaining? Or do you work elsewhere? And what about your hobbies?" "I'm a receptionist in a dentist's office and I raise ducks." Ronnie stared at Sarah open-mouthed, waiting to hear more. When nothing seemed forthcoming, she prompted, "Excuse me for asking, but are ducks a thing? Like, are they trendy, or do you breed them for eating or?" Sarah seemed to draw in on herself as if she were embarrassed. "I just like ducks." "No need to apologize for your passions." Ronnie pondered the meaning of Sarah's hobby and how she'd frame it to Wade. Meanwhile, she caught sight of the man himself mounting up. Wade has a fine look to him in the saddle. Tall. Sturdy. She bet if she stood nearby and caught his eye there'd be a gleam in his gaze that said, "I'm not going to tell you everything, Ronnie Pickett, including how lonely I am." She remembered that exact same look when she'd confronted him earlier, and it made her heart ache. If she told Wade about Sarah's duck interest, he'd find her candidate wanting. Although, increasingly, Ronnie was feeling that Sarah wasn't right for Wade. She was too gentle. Like Libby. Wade didn't need another Libby. He needed a strong, vocal woman to draw him out and remind him of all the joy to be found in life. Still, she was reluctant to give up on Sarah. "I don't suppose you raise chickens, too?" Ronnie turned back to Sarah. Chickens got a lot of respect in the ranching community, certainly more so than ducks. "I raise what I like. And that's ducks. My daddy says I should sell them, but I don't. My flock just keeps getting bigger. For the love of Mike. She's a duck hoarder." The voice in her head suddenly sounded like Wade's. Ronnie sked. There's nothing wrong with keeping ducks. In fact, Wade had designated 10 acres on the DRR to rescuing retired rodeo broncs, including the infamous Juicer. "Do you think there's something wrong with my duck habit?" Eyes wide, Sarah had her feathers ruffled and wasn't letting this go. "Is that why guys don't call me back?" "No. Not at all," Ronnie rushed to reassure her. "You just haven't found the right man for you. And as for me, I'm trying to find the proper frame to present you to eligible men." She touched the younger woman's arm. "How does this sound?" "You'll love Sarah. She's a rancher, born and raised, with experience breeding stock. We don't refer to ducks as stock." Sarah's shrill voice indicated the duck hobby was a sore subject. Message received. Ronnie rushed on, hoping to salvage something. Have you raised horses or bulls? Or both? Of course, I have. But no one would call a duck stock. Understood. Ronnie clung to her smile. What about? You'll love Sarah. She's a rancher, born and raised, with experience breeding stock and fowl. I like that. Sarah sounded slightly less ruffled. She settled back in her place on the bench. That's what I'll say then. Ronnie caught sight of Bess walking past. After promising Sarah she'd keep in touch, she excused herself. Bess took one look at Ronnie's face and said, "No one claimed starting a matchmaking business was going to be easy. Do I look demoralized?" Ronnie checked her cell phone to see if any of the women she'd approached today had messaged her. Nada. I'm going more for a carefree demeanor, one that says I don't desperately need clients. Even if they were only clients for Wade. Bess studied her features again. I think anyone who doesn't know you well would buy the carefree demeanor. Good answer. Ronnie spotted Wade talking to Chandler across the ring. I'm going to need something more than a carefree demeanor if I want to find a wife for Wade. He's reluctant to be matched. Is he? Bess followed the direction of her gaze. Blackmail would work. Ronnie sighed. If only I had something to blackmail him with. And if only I was the blackmailing type. Dad, there's no rodeo next weekend, right? Ginny's small, tired voice came from the back seat of the truck Wade was driving home from the rodeo. There is a rodeo next weekend, sunshine. But I'm not competing. The funds Wade had allocated for entry fees were nearly empty because he wasn't winning. He made a slow turn toward the highway, mindful of the stock trailer full of horses he was towing. I'm just working. I want to stay home at the ranch with Grandma Mary. Ginny had her pillow against the backseat window and a fuzzy blanket over her. It was long past her bedtime, and she sounded 2 ticks shy of sleep. I want to play with my friends in Clementine. You can take next weekend off with Tate and Griff, son, Wade's father said from the passenger seat. His white cowboy hat sat on the dash in front of him next to Wade's dingy straw hat. You've been burning the candle at both ends, competing and working stock. Meaning that's why I haven't been in the money? Wade tried not to snap, but he was afraid he failed. I can't tell you why that is, son, Dad said evenly. But it might do you good to get out and cut loose. Forget about all that pressure you've been putting on yourself to win and just hang out in your own skin. Wade Keller, you need me. Given Ronnie's matchmaking proposal, his father's suggestions sounded suspicious. Did you talk to Ronnie after I turned her down? You know I'm not looking for a wife. He glanced back at Ginny, hoping she wasn't awake. Her eyes were closed, and her mouth was slack-jawed. She was out. I didn't talk to Ronnie. His father had the patience of a saint, which was why he'd done so well taking in teenage boys for 2 decades. Unlike Wade, his voice and demeanor showed no signs of irritation. And I'm not saying you need to replace Libby, but no one can replace Libby. She'd been a good woman, a loving wife, a doting mama. What I'm saying is that it might do you good to hang out with someone other than your family for a change. Wade made a sound of dissent as he brought the rig up to freeway speed and merged into a lane. I don't need time off. Maybe not. But I'm taking you off the work roster for next weekend. That's not necessary. He didn't like being grounded. Taking time off isn't the answer to my problems. Not that I have any, he added quickly. He should have left it there. But it was late, and nothing had gone his way today. Why do you think idle time is what I need? You reduced your workload and look how unhappy it made you. What's this nonsense? Dad half-turned in his seat, the tiniest trace of exasperation slipping through his tone. I'm happy. Ask your mother. You're bored, Wade said with mic-dropping emphasis. You putter around the ranch asking us if we need help with anything. All those heavy sighs you make when we assure you no help is needed don't sell the impression that you're in blissful semi-retirement. You have no more wayward teens to take in and straighten out. Tate and his twin brother Ryan had been among the last. No more stock to manage on rodeo day. Not since he'd handed over that responsibility to Chandler. You don't know what to do with yourself. I'm happy, Dad repeated, albeit curtly and without further explanation. Take the time off before I pull you from the roster for 2 weeks instead of 1. With effort, Wade kept his mouth shut. But inside, he had a lot to say, and he was thinking of saying it to Ronnie. The last thing I need is a wife. Chapter 3. There was nothing as freeing to Ronnie as riding fast. Only 5 dating candidates for Wade. Gore. After yesterday's rodeo fiasco, she sought solace in barrel racing in the Pickett Ranch Arena on Sunday morning, riding Yanni, her Palomino gelding, as if they had a time to beat. And Wade still didn't agree to be matched. Gore. The sun was bright, but the January morning air was cold on Ronnie's heated skin. Frustration had been building since yesterday. And she could trace it back to her little white lie that she was starting a matchmaking service. Wade hadn't bought into it, as had some women, while Bess thought she should open the business for real. And Ronnie felt caught in the middle. What if she recruited a larger dating pool for Wade? And what if he fell in love with the first woman he started dating? What was she supposed to do with the rest of the women? Stay the course, Ronnie. Worry about the women when Wade finds true love. She guided Yanni back to the start position, patting his damp neck. Yanni was a pro at hunting barrels. And he loved it as much as she did. She needed to ride him more often. If she did start a matchmaking service, she'd have less time to spend riding him. Don't get ahead of yourself. But things were tangled inside of her like the power cords beneath her secretarial desk at the elementary school. She hated uncertainty. Yeah, she cried, cueing her horse into action. Yanni sprinted to the first barrel, keeping his compact body low and tight as they circled it. He stretched and practically flew to the next, eating up that 25 feet with long strides. They made a snug pass around the second barrel. And then they were tearing it up toward the third, so in sync after years of practice that Ronnie just knew they were making winning time. Practice always pays off. In a heartbeat, they were past the third barrel and dashing toward the finish. That's what I need. Matchmaking dress rehearsals. The question was, where and with whom could she perform dry runs on? I'd have plenty of practice if I started the business for real. Arg, she cried, reining Yanni in. Over at the gate, Hank waved her down. Aren't you supposed to be packing? I'm packed. Today was moving day. Ronnie had been boxed up for months, prepared to move into the house she'd inherited from her great-aunt Dee. The sweet spinster had left Ronnie her home, even though Ronnie hadn't always been the perfect relative. But Dee understood and accepted young Ronnie's foibles. One time, she'd helped Dee weed the garden and accidentally pulled out her prized geraniums. And what had Dee said when she'd found out? She'd given Ronnie a hug, thanked her and said, I was stuck in a rut with those flowers. Now I can move on to something new. And now, so could Ronnie. She flung herself out of the saddle, suddenly excited. Are you ready to help me move? No, Hank wouldn't look at her. In fact, he tugged his hat brim low. Some of Ronnie's elation drained. She thought she knew why Hank was balking. And the reason didn't make her feel better. Is Mom in the house crying? Hank fidgeted, looking uncomfortable. Mom says she can't bear for her baby to leave. Don't ask me to reschedule moving anymore. I need space. Freedom from her family's protective embrace. They thought she was a disaster waiting to happen. She was cleaning up her own mistakes now. Ronnie slipped Yanni's reins over his head and led him toward the barn, planning to remove his saddle and then cool him down on the walker. She's ready for grandchildren, Hank. Hint hint. I've got things to do before I settle down, Hank said flatly, which was his pat answer. Would it be so bad to wait a little longer to move? I've already postponed 2 times for her. Ronnie wasn't letting Mom have her way today. It was the one thing she could control. Hank said something too low for her to catch, something that might have had to do with Pickett folk and their stubborn natures. He pointed back toward the barrels. You only race when you're upset. What's bothering you? Everything. Nothing. She stopped, faced her brother and voiced the question that had kept her awake last night. If everybody is looking for love, why aren't they open to matchmaking? Think of it like this. There are lots of ways to buy a car. Your way of selling them a car might not be their way of buying a car. And maybe others aren't looking for a car, period. Hank gave her a wry grin. I'm not looking for a car. Or for love. Not yet anyway. Ronnie made a frustrated sound, staring at the clear blue Oklahoma sky. Was that the problem? Wade wasn't ready for love again? It had been 2 years. Of those who are looking for love, why wouldn't they want a little help finding it? Why didn't she have 20 candidates instead of 5? Hank chuckled. That question is above my pay grade. Yanni nudged Ronnie and plodded forward. He knew there were oats in his future. Lot of help you two are. She led her horse through the gate, letting Hank close it behind them. Over at the main house, 2 of the ranch dogs were sunning themselves on the porch. Brisket, their elderly chocolate Labrador, and Barstow, their shepherd mix. Her brother trotted to catch up, touching her arm. Love isn't like baking cupcakes. There's no recipe. And if it were me, I wouldn't pay for something when I don't know what I'm getting. That's deep. She nodded. And fair. Demoralizing, too. It applied to both Wade and the women. They entered the barn. It was a 2-story structure built nearly a century ago by the first Picketts to own the property. The beams were hand-hewn and rock-solid. The siding and roof had been replaced a few years ago, along with the stalls and doors. It was just the beams that said the family had endured and would continue to endure. At least, if Hank and their brother David finally settled down and had kids. Ronnie sighed. Maybe she'd been wrong about Hank. Maybe he was too busy with the ranch. Maybe he hadn't met the right woman. She looped Yanni's reins on a hook in the breezeway, thinking of Sarah, who was nesting in her own way. What's your opinion on ducks? Is this an ecosystem question? Hank loosened the gelding's girth strap. Are ducks as good for the habitat as bees? No, she struggled to keep her tone neutral. I'm just asking you if you like ducks. Hank and Sarah might hit it off. I prefer turkeys. They're wild. I don't have to feed them or protect them from predators, but I can still have one for Thanksgiving dinner. Hank hefted her saddle and spared her a grin before he disappeared into the tack room. That was a matchmaking long shot, Ronnie muttered, switching out Yanni's bridle for a halter and lead rope. Too bad. They'd have made adorable babies. She led the gelding out to the circular walker on the other side of the barn, fastened his lead rope to it and set the motor on low. She moved back, making sure everything was working properly and the gelding was settled in. Were you trying to set me up with a duck breeder? Hank joined her. Is all this matchmaking for other people really necessary? Don't you want to find someone of your own? Who would want me? Ronnie asked absently, although recently she'd spent far too much time pondering the answer to that question. Hank grabbed her by the shoulders. Who? Guys ask me for your number all the time. She scoffed. Like you'd give out my number. Admit it, you and Mom would prefer I stay single and on the ranch forever. Her brother's dark brows lowered. His expression turned fierce. That's not true. We want you to be happy. Yanni's ears twitched as he walked past. Then why don't you give out my number? Was it because he thought she was a walking catastrophe maker? Still holding on to her arms, he said, it's because the guys who ask for your number aren't good enough for you. She shrugged him off, annoyed. Sounds like you're running a matchmaking service of your own. He widened his stance and put his hands on his hips. Is it wrong to want the best for my kid sister? Have you ever considered that Mom would be happy to see you move out if you were getting married and settling down for good? You mean she'd be happy to pass me from one keeper to another? Ronnie's fingers curled into her palms. Let me be clear. I'm not getting married. Ever. Some of the bluster drained from Hank, like an inflatable lawn holiday decoration that had been unplugged. You're a matchmaker who doesn't believe in love? Yes. No. I mean, I don't believe it's in the cards for me. For others, for sure. But for a woman who was something of a jinx, no. I know who I am on the inside, but when it comes to romance. Hank nodded. He knew. It was like there were two separate Ronnies, the woman the world saw and the woman Ronnie believed herself to be. There was the Ronnie in her head, the one who planned romantic picnics. And then there was Ronnie out there in the world, spreading her picnic blanket over a fire ant mound. After her last date had called her a menace and was trying to sue her for damages, she'd come to a decision. Men were safer without her. She turned to leave, needing a moment to let go of the upset inside of her. Hank caught her arm. Why? Why would you think that? Need you ask? She gave a sad little laugh as she extricated herself. If my own family doesn't think I'm capable enough to live on my own, what could I bring to a relationship but trouble? You aren't trouble, Hank insisted. If that's true, you would have gotten married by now. It was suddenly all so clear to her. And so demoralizing. Dad was a state representative, spending weeks at a time in the capital, leaving the ranch and family matters, including the care of Ronnie, in Hank's capable hands. Her older brother was the one Mom turned to when she and Ronnie bumped heads. He was the one sent to make peace or make Ronnie see reason. It's time I got out of the way of your happiness, she said softly. Hank scowled but didn't argue, confirming her hypothesis. Ronnie wanted to saddle Yanni once more and gallop to the far end of the ranch. But Hank would worry. Perhaps there was an upside to this. You don't need to hover over me, Hank. But I do need something from you. She smiled sweetly, an idea forming in her head. I need a favor, some cowboy clients to match with the cowgirls I've got signed up. Because she suddenly wasn't certain any of the 5 women she'd recruited would be right for Wade. I can match them to Hank's friends. You want to? Hank took a few quick steps back. Don't look at me. I am looking at you. She followed him, matching him step for step. You and your single friends. No, Hank stopped, holding his ground, chin thrust out. I'll settle for referrals to your friends. And if you don't give them to me, I'll tell Nan Ingersoll that you want to get back together. Nan was sweet and had been hung up on Hank for a long time in the worst way. We were never together. Hank cried, as if she prodded a sore spot. It was one date. Ronnie's smile broadened. Oh, but it must have been a doozy of a date. Nan always talks about you when I see her around town. Hank lowered his hat brim, which did nothing to hide his frustrated expression. I'll tell Mom you're ready to move today. And your friends? To his credit, Hank didn't stomp away. I'll mention it to them. I can't promise more. Good. Impulsively, Ronnie hugged him. Things were looking up. Not to mention, she had a knack for blackmailing after all. Dad, do I have a college fund? Said Ginny. Wade choked on the buttermilk biscuit he'd taken a bite of on this early morning. He coughed and reached for his water. Beside him, Chandler slapped his back, nearly causing Wade's water glass to spill. Wade brushed his brother's hand away. What makes you ask about college funds, Sunshine? Because heaven knew no one in his biological family had ever gone to college. It was Sunday breakfast. His mother had laid out her usual big spread to fill them up before they attended church. Her grown boys may not live in the main ranch house, but Sunday breakfast found them all in Mom's kitchen. No one wanted to miss Mary Harrison's sausage, biscuits and gravy. The price of breakfast was a seat in church afterward. A lady at the rodeo yesterday said her husband was wasting her kid's college fund 'cause he was losing dot. Ginny sat in the chair next to Wade, wearing her best Sunday dress and swinging her feet. She grinned across the table at Griff and Tate, who were starting to laugh. Did you waste mine, Dad? His brother's laughter died away. Wade's father looked up from his plate. His mother turned from her position at the sink. All eyes were on Wade. I haven't started a college fund for you yet, Sunshine. The biscuit in his hand crumbled. I thought I'd wait and see if you wanted to go. I do. Ginny beamed at him. I want to be a lawyer and sue folks for being mean. Griff and Tate started laughing again. Dad smiled and sipped his coffee. Mom wiped her hands on a dish towel, looking thoughtful. Sunshine, Wade laid his arm over the back of Ginny's chair. Lawyers don't just sue people. Some of them write and review contracts. Or make laws. Or ensure that folks get treated fairly. So, you like lawyers? At his nod, Ginny swung her feet faster. Good. Makes me happy since I'm gonna be one. I like a child with ambition. Mom's short silver hair was tamed and curled today, and she wore an apron over a blue dress. You better start saving, Wade. Chandler managed to grin and shove a bite of gravy-soaked biscuit in his mouth at the same time. Are you saving for your kid, Chandler? Wade asked, treading in treacherous waters since Chandler was only recently divorced. Chandler sat back and finished chewing his food before answering. Sam is 4. And he'll probably be a cowhand, like his father. I thought Ginny was going to be a working hand and love rodeo too. And look how that came back to bite Wade. Nope. Lawyer. Ginny stabbed a piece of sausage with her fork. Who inspired you to be a lawyer, Sunshine? Yes, to whom did Wade owe this debt of gratitude? He grit his teeth, trying not to panic over college tuition he would need for 7 years or so. I saw lawyers on a show Grandpa let me watch on his phone yesterday. Ginny grinned at Wade's father. She asked me what folks went to college for. Dad carefully wiped gravy from his chin. I thought you'd be proud of me for finding a video on my phone speaking to kids about different types of college education. You know he's right, Mom chimed in. Your father can barely figure out how to email on his phone. He can barely send a picture on our text loop, Griff pointed out. And don't get me started on him accessing his recorded programs on television, Chandler added. All right. All right. You've all had your fun. Dad eyed Wade. What's the big deal? It's not like being a lawyer is a bad thing. Who knows? Ginny could be a judge someday. A judge, Wade said vaguely, glancing around at his brothers. No one seemed to be joyous anymore. They'd all had dealings with judges and court-appointed lawyers when they were young, when their family situations fell apart for one reason or another. He bet none wanted to deal with the legal system any more than they had to. But there was Ginny, his pride and joy, eyes full of dreams. I guess I'll open up a college fund, Wade said with forced optimism, wondering how big this fund would need to be. I'll call Dix over at the bank. One of his brothers who didn't work on the ranch. After their plates had been cleared and the dishes done, the family loaded up into trucks to head into town for the late morning service. The day was clear and the air crisp. Sunlight bounced off the white walls of the main ranch house and the original old farmhouse. Wade. His mother carried her brown jacket and a picnic basket down the front porch steps. Can you drop this off after church? Sure. To who? He took it from her. I heard from Nell Pickett that Ronnie's finally moving out. Mom patted his arm. Nell hasn't let her go easily. I bet she could use a pick-me-up. Nell? Or Ronnie? Wade chuckled. Ronnie. Mom gave her head a shake. He stopped laughing, not liking to hear that Ronnie was having a hard time, even if he'd been avoiding her since Libby died. Where's she moving? Dee Dee's old place in town. The Pink Palace on King Street? Wade grinned. The bungalow had once been painted a too bright shade of pink, a color hotter than a fluff of cotton candy. It was fitting that colorful Ronnie was moving in. His mother explained what she'd packed inside the basket, going on and on about ingredients and such. Hang on. Wade extended the basket back to her. Why aren't you taking it over? You don't have an ulterior motive, do you? Have you heard Ronnie's started a matchmaking business? Mom scoffed, ignoring the basket as she slipped her jacket on. Course, I heard. I'm just being neighborly, and you know how my back stiffens up after a long service spent sitting on those hard wooden pews. You'd be doing me a favor. Wade nodded. He knew. But across the ranch yard, Griff, Ryan and Tate were pointing at him and laughing.